In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to take care of a Cuban false chameleon. Everything in this video that I mentioned that you need is linked down below. Every single little thing. So I've got a full list curated just for you. Now, false chameleons are amazing pets. I absolutely adore the two that are in this house. They are fantastic. The false chameleon lives in the trees, so naturally they want an enclosure that is upright, so they can climb up and down. Even though these lizards are quite large, luckily they're quite lazy and they sit about the place. But that doesn't mean they don't move at all. So although their tank requirements aren't extremely massive, they do need a bit of space. For example, our false chameleons will laze about the enclosure, but now and again you hear a big thud because they will launch themselves and launch from one side to the other in a big jump. So they want that space to jump around and exercise too. For adult false chameleons, the minimum size enclosure I recommend is a 24-inch wide, 18 deep by 36-inch tall enclosure. Anything smaller than that, they kind of just sat there and can shuffle around, but can't jump about and actually use their space like they should. Some old school mindsets might recommend an 18 by 18 by 24 as the minimum for an adult, but in my opinion, that's way too small. That size is what I keep my green and gnolls in. And if I hold up this adult female next to the tank, you realise how small the tank is compared to that big girl. Now, the daytime temperatures they experience out in the wild are anywhere from like 70 up to like 90. So air temperatures within that range are good to go. And you can provide that easily by giving them a low wattage heat lamp. You can get a cheap dome fixture, pop a 50-watt heat lamp inside that, plonk it over a branch somewhere in the corner or near the top, an isolated area of sunshine for your false chameleon to go sit in and warm up if they want to. Just by giving that'll warm up the rest of the enclosure into those sort of temperatures. Most of us have room temperatures in our homes in that range anyway, so by giving that extra heat lamp for them to go warm up in and bolster up the tank a little bit is perfect. To measure your air temperatures throughout the day, you can use something like a digital thermometer. This one measures humidity as well as temperature. If you pop that in your enclosure somewhere midway up, that'll give you a good idea of the air temperature. Now, the other light you want to give them and add to the sunshine patch you're going to create in the enclosure is UVB. UVB is essential for keeping them really healthy. It makes vitamin D in their system and it stops them from getting sick. It doesn't need to be an intense one. Any sort of low range, low strength UVB, the long tubes, plonk that next to your heat lamp in one spot and you're good to go. Your false chameleon can come down, in and out of exposure underneath that lamp and choose how much of it they want to use. That can be UVB tubes like ZoomEd's 5.0 or Arcadia's Shade Dweller lamp, both of which are linked down below. Once you've got your heat lamp and your UVB, you're going to want to put it on a timer or manually do it yourself, but have them on from like 8 AM to 8 PM, a 12-hour cycle to give them a daytime and have it off at nighttime. At nighttime, it's perfectly okay to allow it to get cool, have all the heating and lighting off, and let it go down to like 60. Now, most people's homes don't really get that cool. Most of us keep our rooms warmer than that. But if you're in an area that is really, really cold, some supplemental nighttime heating won't go amiss. Now let's talk decorations. These guys live in trees on branches. So naturally in their enclosures, we give them lots of branches. This could be anything from cork branches to branches outside like oak wood, whatever you want. Just make sure that you have branches going vertical, horizontal, diagonal. Place them in the enclosure so that your animal can go down to the bottom and then up to the top and have areas of different branches to use and climb all amongst their habitat. As we come down from our branches down to the bottom, we need to think about substrate. A substrate mix of like topsoil and play sand will go quite well. Heavily leaning on the topsoil, you can even mix in sphagnum moss. We want a nice tropical mix of bedding along the bottom. Not only does that catch their poop for you to clean up later on, but also as that gets wet, it holds in moisture and raises humidity because these guys are from a humid environment that also rains a lot. We want their humidity to be around 70% to like 80% all year round. So our substrate needs to be one that captures that moisture and holds on to it in that enclosure. Then what we want to do is spray or mist down our enclosure. I use a pressurized paint sprayer. I fill that with water and I spray down my enclosure. The best thing to do is spray water droplets onto large areas of branches or leaves What that's going to do is create water droplets that stay and collect on those leaves, and then your false chameleon can go over and lick up and drink all that water. They prefer to drink droplets off of leaves or branches or the rain that falls on their head. Speaking of the rain that falls on their head, you can drip or spray at their head, and as the water collects down their face, they will sit there and drink the water that you're spraying at them. So what I typically try to do is I give them a manual water, let them drink as long as they want until they stop, and then just spray down the leaves and the branches in the enclosure so that it collects in there, so that later in the day they go and drink from those droplets if they get thirsty again. But typically, to maintain that humidity, the substrate plus spraying once a day typically does the job. The other thing we need to remember is just because it's high humidity, it doesn't mean the environment needs to be sodden, wet, and stagnant constantly. The perfect blend is a lot of water all at once when you spray them once a day, and then it dries out in between. So they get a flash of humidity, they can drink and hydrate, it dries off, and then naturally as it goes into night time and your heating and lighting goes off, the humidity will rise once again. For the most part, I only need to spray once per day, but if you're from a dry area or your reptile room or your bedroom is drier, you might want to spray twice a day. Like I say, you can manually do that, or if you think you're going to be away a lot of the time, get a misting system. Then you can basically automate this whole thing. Now I spoke of leaves and getting water to stay on the leaves. A good plant which I love to use is pothos. It's really easy to grow. You spray it and that's enough to water it. It grows in low light, often without lights at all, just natural daytime lighting. So when you have your basking spots in your enclosure, it grows really well. The best thing to do is get a pothos plant and then get one of those cocoa core posts for it to grow up. Then you have this big column of plant that takes over half the enclosure, and it's the perfect thing to spray and collect all that water. Not only will that collect the water for your animal to go drink from, but naturally as that plant breathes, it creates humidity and releases moisture into the air to raise humidity for your false chameleon. You can find the poles and the plant linked down below. Now we can move on to feeding. These guys in the wild primarily eat slow-moving prey items, like snails. Most of their diet in the wild is actually made up of snails and slugs, but they will eat feeder bugs that we feed them in captivity. So if you can get them snails, perfect, feed them snails. Zoomed do a can of snails that some people can get their false chameleons to eat, but they can also eat cockroaches, crickets, grasshoppers if you're from Europe, and then worms like mealworms and superworms. I'd recommend feeding your false chameleon once or twice a week of a handful of bugs at a time. Now I know I say a handful, but truthfully it depends on the metabolism of your individual false chameleon. If you find that a handful is like 10 to you and your false chameleon is getting really fat, bring that down to maybe 5. If you find that your false chameleon is getting thinner and thinner each week, bolster up the feeding amount. As a beginner, it's nice to follow these guides, but as you go on, you're going to find your way and cater your feeding to your actual pet. We've actually found that the false chameleons will learn to eat from a food bowl, which is really convenient. They'll come down and eat from a food bowl. You want to try and feed different types of bugs. The more you can vary the diet and create a balanced diet, the better. Some feeder insects like superworms are really fatty, and they're a sweet fatty treat that are high in calories. That can be good if you've got a skinny animal. If you've got an animal that's constantly gaining weight whilst eating it, maybe hold off on that. At this very moment, we have a female false chameleon with a big bowl of superworms, but that's because she's laid loads of eggs and she's lost loads of weight. Now, when you feed on their bugs, you're going to want to supplement. So there's 2 supplements you're going to want to use: a multivitamin or multivitamin and a calcium supplement. I would dust your bugs with the calcium supplement every single time you feed, and then once a week to every 2 weeks, use the multivitamin on one feeding. Supplementation can be made as easy as that. And that brings me nicely onto breeding. Female false chameleons will lay several eggs across the year. So it's really important that you give them a good laying site for them to root around in substrate and go down to lay their eggs. What can happen if you don't give them a good amount of substrate at the bottom to go lay their eggs in is they will look for a place to lay eggs that are inside them that you may or may not know about. And if they don't have a good spot to lay their eggs, they will hold on to them and try and reabsorb them. Sometimes that can cause complications, or they'll stop eating for ages and start losing weight, for example. So I recommend giving them a good patch of soil, a good deep laying site. Even if you aren't expecting to have eggs or have no intention of breeding, just have it there in case you decide to develop eggs. Even if they're infertile, she's never even been with a male. It's always good to have it there. Males and females sometimes can live together quite well, but when it's breeding season, the male will pester that female a lot. So it's a good idea to separate them and have 2 separate enclosures and bring together to breed and separate to give her space and bring together, separate. That gives you more control over what you're trying to do. If you are trying to breed her, I recommend looking through that substrate on a regular basis just to look for any eggs. If you do find eggs, you can take them out and incubate them anywhere from 25 degrees to 27.5 degrees. Babies hatch out super tiny. The good thing about the babies is they're really easy to cohab in the beginning. So you can have temporary little enclosures like little faunariums where you make a little habitat in there. With our babies, we put them in little faunariums and lay our UVB across the top. It makes it easier for us to keep an eye on them and for them to find food. Once it gets bigger, it can progress into a larger enclosure, and to a certain point it can go into the adult enclosure because it's so big that you can easily find it. Check out all the equipment down below, and if you like these types of videos, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.